Welcome back to another episode of the Hardwood Speaks podcast, where the game is always going to speak for itself. Welcome back, guys. We got a lot of stuff to go over. We got a draft lottery. We got playoff reactions. So I think we should just get right into it. First thing I'm going to go over is the draft lottery. Congratulations to Timberwolves fans. Minnesota won the draft lottery. They got the number one pick. And the top three is looking pretty intriguing to me. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a little mock draft of the top three, because it's not really my forte to really project prospects coming into the NBA. I don't have the eye for that, but I have the eye for, the top talent and, how top talent can translate into the NBA. So I'll just do a little mock draft at the third pick. I think that it would go to LaMelo Ball. I think LaMelo Ball would be picked third, because I think the perfect fit for Charlotte, because they need a guy that they can build around. I think building around a guard it's easier because you can bring in veteran centers, because veteran centers, they know how the NBA is played and they know how to draw foul. Like, they have more of a sense of how the game is played because they do the dirty work. Whereas with guards, I think it's easy. And whereas with guards, if you find veterans, some of them are inconsistent. They're not really that efficient, and it's hard to really build around centers and bring in consistent veterans that aren't already at a home, that aren't on the trade market. So I think that Charlotte is in a good place where they can draft LaMelo Ball and really begin to build around him, and build around him correctly. Don't do what you did with Kemba Walker, which was basically give him just the same talent, which was the same level of talent for years, to where it was easy to figure them out year in and year out. So I think they need to do a better job of building. Mitch Kupchak needs to readjust his way of building around a guard. But I think LaMelo Ball is the perfect acquisition and the perfect prospect to come in for Charlotte. And then for the second pick, you got Golden State coming off of a champ. They went to the finals last year. They're only a year and a half removed of getting to the NBA Finals. And you're telling me with Steph, Clay, Andrew Wiggins, and Draymond Green, you're going to bring in a guy, you're going to be bringing a top two pick, a second pick. That's just ridiculous. And for me, I think it would be perfect if they drafted James Wiseman, because James Wiseman's a center, and he would be perfect because he can rim protect, he can shoot, and also he can set screens. So that's all you really need. And as well, he can develop a passing skill to where if he's in the high post or the free throw line extended, he can give those little backdoor cut feeds to whether it's Klay Thompson or Steph Curry going backdoor. So I think that's a perfect fit, especially since he can stretch the floor and really plays into the scheme of being able to shoot. And then that way, your starting lineup doesn't have a guy that you can double off of in James Wiseman, when they used to have Andrew Bogut that you could easily just leave. So I think that's a perfect fit for Golden State coming into the draft. If they keep the pick as well, because they could trade the pick as well for a veteran center. So, and then for Minnesota, I think it would be Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. I think Anthony Edwards is a really good guard. He's a really dynamic scorer at his position, and I think he'll be a perfect complementary backcourt teammate for D'Angelo Russell. And I think that would be a really good fit because he kind of has a really nice motor. I think his motor needs to be adjusted on the defensive end, and it wouldn't be a great backcourt in defensively. However, I think you can teach them how to draw. Kyle Lowry wasn't really that great of a defender coming into the league, and now he's like one of the best players at drawing charges. So I think you can teach some guys how to, play the lane and, step in, make the big play defensively, and maybe get your hand in the lane. You can teach them how to do that. James Harden did the same thing. He wasn't a good defender, and now he leads the league in steals for years and years in the past. So I think that's a good pick for them. I think it'll be good offensively. And then you got Josh Okogie who's a really good one-on-one defender. You could start at the small forward. You got Malik Beasley coming off the bench. You could do that. You got a lot of options if you're Minnesota. And where I think is a big winner for the draft lottery is the Western Conference, the entire Western Conference. Because now, with the only two teams that did not make the bubble getting the top two picks, I can make an argument that every team in the Western Conference can make the playoffs. You can make an argument for each team and say that they can make a playoffs for so many reasons. So I think it's interesting to me. And if you thought that the Western Conference was competitive in years past, wait till 2021 because it's going to be wild for sure. So, and then now let's just get into the playoffs. So let's get into some playoff reactions. I'm going to go over Philadelphia first and how they really got smacked in Game 2. It was appalling, and I think that Brett Brown, the head coach, he's in trouble because, they started off the game in a good place. They set the tone through Joel Embiid. They were hitting their open shots. They were doing things that they were not doing in Game 1. But then, for some reason, Brett Brown went away from Joel Embiid again, and it turned into just no effort on the defensive end, no effort on the offensive end, no execution. It just wasn't flowing at all. Jason Tatum was getting whatever he wanted. He was hitting a lot of step-back threes contested, and I understand, but there was no – where the laziness happened was in the pick and roll, and Joel Embiid would be in that drop coverage where whoever the ball handler was would come off the screen, and Joel Embiid would literally stay in the paint. When in this day and age, you got to press up. You got to put some pressure on the ball because these guys are so well and so skilled offensively that if you give them any space, they can do whatever they wanted to. They can do whatever they want with the ball. If they have no one in front of them, that's a warm-up shot. And Joel Embiid kept getting himself into no man's land. And so that was a problem for Philadelphia. And then the next thing to go over is really there's a couple of number 2 guys that are underperforming. One has underperformed for the first 2 games. One has underperformed just in Game 2. And that's Paul George underperforming in Game 2. And Chris Middleton has not shown up at all in his series against Orlando. And I think that is just – sorry, I guess I said Siri. But I think that Chris Middleton is he's been now inconsistent, actually consistently bad in 6 straight playoff games going back to the 2019 Eastern Conference Finals. And it's just been horrific for Chris Middleton. 14 points in Game 1 on 4 for 12 shooting, and then 2 points. He had 2 points in UNI in Game 2 on 1 for 8 shooting. So it's just, and to me, if I'm going to pick a guy that I have more faith in, it's Paul George because, like I said in a previous episode, Kawhi Leonard had an impact on Kyle Lowry that changed Kyle Lowry from being a playoff choker to now we view him as a playoff winner. And I think that's going to happen with Paul George. Remember, last year, Kyle Lowry had 0 points. 0. He had 0 points in Game 1 against Orlando. And then from then on, he really just changed the narrative and kept playing with his head up. And, Kawhi Leonard I feel like it was an infectious effect from Kawhi Leonard, and it dwindled down to Kyle Lowry. And I think that's what's going to happen with Kawhi going to Paul George. And I think Paul George is in a good place where he can come back. He doesn't need to really have his head down. And he put on his Instagram, he put on social media saying like, yo, I don't care if you're thinking about me. So I think he's going to come out with some vengeance here in Game 2 or Game 3. But if I'm Chris Middleton, you got to show up because to me, the reason why I'm more worried for Chris Middleton is because his ineffectiveness, his disengagement on the offensive end, and his laziness on the defensive end, lack of intensity. It's worrisome because it's not that I'm worried about them winning a series against Orlando. It's like, what statement are you making right now that makes Miami or Toronto think, yo, I gotta watch out for this team? Because I haven't seen it. And in Game 2, they won by 15. Listen, Orlando made 3 shots in the first, and I'm a Magic fan. I watched the game. Orlando made 3 shots in the first quarter, and yet it was a 12-point game. They made 3 shots, and it was a 12-point game at the end of the first quarter. Giannis was not getting to his spots as easily. He had 20 points on 23 shots. He had 28 points on 23 shots, and it just wasn't pretty of a win. The score does not say Bucks blew out Orlando. It does. The score says more of that than it does of what was played. And I think what was played was just because Orlando cut it to 8. They actually were making it a run in the fourth quarter. So I think that if Chris Middleton was on, it would have been a much worse game. It would have been a blow. It would have been a 30-point win. But Chris Middleton has been inconsistent, and until he gets consistent, then that's when the Milwaukee Bucks will look dangerous to the rest of the league, to the teams that they're going to have to face in later rounds. So that's my concern if I'm a Bucks fan. And then on the other series for the 1-8, you got Lakers and Portland, and to me, man, LeBron James. Let me just say this. LeBron James, I'm so impressed by him. It's not even that he's so great offensively. It's just how well he can control the pace and the tempo without needing to be a great offensive force in scoring the ball. Like for game 1, Shaq said on Inside the NBA, he said that AD and LeBron did not dominate. But then Kenny Smith came back and said that he thought that LeBron dominated. And I agree. LeBron dominated the tempo. He was able to dominate the passing lanes. He was able to dominate the flow of the game. Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony, they just fired back with hitting jump shots and hitting shots that were basically the game sealing shots. But with LeBron, he responded. I feel like it was a response in game 2. He only scored 10 points, and he was in control. He set the tone early by getting AD and KCP involved. KCP only had 0 points. He was 0 for 9 in game 1. And then he comes in, he hit his first 2 shots, and he was 4 for 6 for the game, and he was really consistent. He had finished with 16 points. And Anthony Davis, of course, was just dominant. Anthony Davis was dominant in his own right, getting after loose balls and dominating the paint offensively and defensively on both ends. It was just really good to see that Anthony Davis was able to come back from his 8 for 24 game. But LeBron, I mean, he was just. I'm impressed because he did not need to score the game, but yet you could tell it was a 17-point game at halftime. However, if I saw this game, if it was like a 10-point game at halftime, I think LeBron would have felt the game needing him to score. And he felt like he didn't need to score. I think he was in control. And LeBron James, to me, even through this, is the best player in the game. And I am not a fan. I am not a fan of LeBron James. But I just can't ignore the greatness that he's been displaying in terms of controlling a game from the jump. And then to segue into a guy that similarly controlled the game, James Harden in game 2. James Harden in game 2 was absolutely sensational. I really loved how he not shooting the ball, he was 5 for 16, and Eric Gordon was 6 for 20, but he was able to read some passing lanes. I really thought that he was able to control the ball on the offensive end pretty well. But what won Houston the game, and where I'm going to switch this to a more team-oriented topic, Houston is so good. You get 6 for 20 from Eric Gordon, 0 for 10 from 3. He did not make a three-pointer. And James Harden was 5 for 16, 2 for 11 from 3. Your 2 best players on the court were having an awful shooting night. And you won the game because of your defense. And I'm really going to talk about that today because I think because if Houston is this committed on the defensive end of the floor, they are legit. I'm going to say it again. If they are this committed on the defensive end of the floor throughout the entire playoffs, they are legit. I have never said this about a Houston team before. I didn't say that when they were in 2018. I didn't say it in 2019. I did not say it at all. But this defense, I feel like Russell Westbrook has instilled an energy in the team. I think and it's infectious to James Harden because you saw game 2, James Harden was getting up out of his seat, cheering. He was a big cheerleader. He never used to be like that when Chris Paul was there. And yet, he is like that right now. And the Rockets are looking as dangerous. more dangerous than they've ever looked. And I'm not going to sit here and say that's because Russell Westbrook is out. That remains to be seen. But I will say, if they keep this intensity on the defensive end of the floor and this sharpness, they are legit and they can give the Lakers and my title pick, the Clippers, a run for their money. So I'm going to go into why real quick. Okay, guys? Let's go. So here in this first play, the goal for the Rockets, you got to keep the three guards, Dennis Schroeder, Chris Paul, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander out of the paint or out of the middle of the floor, because if they're in the middle of the floor, that's when lanes open up for cutters, and if that doesn't open up, then you can get into the lane and feed Steven Adams on the dunker spot. But they did this perfectly, so you got Dennis Schroeder here on the wing, and Daniel House says, I'm going to take this challenge. I want to take this challenge. I want the challenge of guarding a finalist for Sixth Man of the Year. That is who Daniel House is guarding right now. And he says, I'm going to take this challenge. And Dennis Schroeder tries to get an opening, gets a little pump fake, tries to drive by. Look at him standing. Look at that. He stays in front of him, cuts off the baseline perfectly, and is disrupting Dennis Schroeder's flow of the game. And then you see here, OKC is up 3-0. Up 3. And then Chris Paul, you see Eric Gordon, he's keeping him from turning a corner. And he knows that they're so deep into the shot clock that if he gets into the lane, he knows that he's going to have help. So then he keeps playing, and he forces Chris Paul to pump fake and take a tough shot. And then Steven Adams gets the offensive rebound, kicks back out, and now look. So now everyone is on that side. Everyone is on that side, and now they are like, okay, let's bring it back. Because if you saw before, everyone was stacked on that right side. But now Chris Paul brings everyone back and does what Houston wants them to do. Keep it on a side of the floor, not in the middle of the floor. And this leads to a Dennis Schroeder trying to get his footing, and he gets to the basket and gets a tough layup and doesn't make it. Tough layup, forcing a miss. That is a commitment on the defensive end. Keeping a scheme in your mind and then not allowing OKC to disrupt that scheme. So now, what happens when they look like they're going to disrupt the scheme? I'm going to go into that right now. So here, Dennis Schroeder, again, you see Eric Gordon. Look at Eric Gordon. He is keeping Dennis Schroeder out of the lane. That is the goal here. He is keeping Dennis Schroeder out of the lane. So he starts here, but guess what? Dennis Schroeder avoids a pick, and now look. Now he's getting to the lane. Now he gets into the middle of the floor. So you know what's the next thing that Eric Gordon does? He says, okay, if you're going to get into the middle of the floor, I'm not going to let you get into the lane. I'm not going to let you get into the paint where you can live in with your floater. Instead, Daniel House comes in, draws a little double, and kicks it back out to Chris Paul. And here, Chris Paul gets a little pump fake, back out, and then reset, boom. Now Daniel House is now guarding Chris Paul. And he says, I want this challenge too. He says, I want to take on a top 6, 7 at least, point guard in this game. And I want to see if I can take former teammate of mine. I'm going to take this guy, and I want to see if I can stop this guy from doing what he does best, which is score in the paint. And he said, look at him. You kind of see that he's kind of more long, and he has a step to the right, because the right is the middle of the floor. He's trying to keep him from getting to the middle of the floor. So here, Chris Paul goes and does exactly what Daniel House wants, and takes another tough shot, forcing a miss. And now that was... You see the score, 85-80. The first play was 80-77. This was part of a 17-0 run for Houston that was solely made on the defensive end of the floor. This is such a good team offensively. They shot an NBA playoff record 56 or 57 threes in the game. So you know that they're potent offensively. But if they're this committed defensively, they could pull off an upset on the Lakers, and that's less of a bold statement saying coming like that's more of a bold that's less of a bold statement considering how poorly Portland plays on the defensive end of the floor. So I think that is a great Houston is making themselves look like a real title contender, and it's something to look forward to because they could be the dark horse that people like Kendrick Perkins have been saying. So that's really the rundown for today. That's the episode. Hope you guys enjoy your weekend. And thank you guys for watching again. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And catch me on Tuesday or Wednesday when the game will speak for itself.